That's the fallout from the night afterwards. And now Stella and Stanley talk before the poker game. And Stanley's a bit annoyed. He doesn't understand what's happening. And Stella is... What we start to see in Stella is her acceptance of what's happened at Belle, her taking of Blanche's position, trying to defend. I think you can see Stella standing in front of Blanche to Stanley. Stanley's anger really starts emerging here. His aggression, his tactics, his faux intellectualism. You really see his insecurity here with repetition of the Napoleonic Code and his acquaintances of various types. So you see Stella standing in front of him, but then when Blanche dismisses her, it is just Blanche and Stanley facing off for the first time. And you see that first major conflict and how they deal with it. And you see a lot of their personalities. So they're going to Galatoire's for supper because they're at a poker night. And, right away, where's my supper? I'm not going to Galatoire's. Well, she has made a supper for him. And he's being sarcastic. He doesn't really understand. He's in a bad mood. He's no longer the charming man, charming beauty, or whatever he was in the first scene. He's more aggressive. And Stella is very doting. And we see that from... look, I have to lie to her because I don't know how she would take the poker game. And then we're going out because we're going to need some money. So, of course, Stella doesn't have any recourse to funds. So she's going to constantly need Stanley to be that source. And we get the first sense... I mean, she's mentioned it before, but now it's her first bath in the tub to deal with her nerves. She's her anxious nature cleaning herself. An attempt of purification, perhaps. And she breaks it to Stanley. We've lost Belle. And then she goes on, and I don't really recall this language being used, but it is interesting that Stella says sacrificed or something. Is she making this up? Inferring? I don't know. From what Blanche is saying, but this idea that it had to, Stella doesn't actually understand what's happened. And she's just, that's not important to her. What's important to her is making her sister feel comfortable. Don't tell her about the baby. Understand her, be nice to her. She wasn't used to finding it, she wasn't ready to find us in such a small place. Admire her dress. She's just giving a set of instructions on how to deal with with Blanche. And you can imagine a man like Stanley, he's not very receptive to it. And she doesn't want to just talk about this issue about Belle until she's calmed down. And here Stanley starts getting really annoyed. So she hasn't showed you any proof of what's happened. So he starts getting really suspicious. And here he starts to make his first mention of the Napoleonic Code, which I think is quite comic because he's talking about something legal, which is the idea of husband and wife, that property is owned together on both sides. If one party is taken advantage of, they're both taken advantage of. And he feels like, he starts explaining it, and Stella says, I can't have this, my head's swimming. Okay, that's fine. Stanley gets really angry and aggressive, and he says, I'll just wait until she's out of the tub, because I'm going to talk to her directly, and because he feels swindled. And he does not like to feel swindled. If she's swindled, he's swindled. He suspects her of waste and, stealing the money maybe from sale. And Stella's really worried because of her nerves, and she doesn't want her to go to pieces again. Doesn't want, and she's really emphasizing it wasn't sold; it's lost. So sacrifice, loss. She doesn't understand exactly. Is that willful, or is she just falling into this trap of Blanche? It's hard to say. And now comes a really important part for exploring issues surrounding class and culture. And I think a lot of what Scene 2 is about exploring that. It could come in this idea of the Napoleonic Code, but now what happens is Stanley imagines he's going to find a big bucket of money in this trunk, as if she's hiding it. And what he finds is a bunch of clothing that to his uneducated eyes he thinks are really valuable. And Stella is the one who's constantly reminding him in this scene that this is all, in a way, this is all old clothing. It's not as nice as he thinks. And by implication, maybe not as nice as she thinks. In particular, things like the tiara, which comes back at the end of the play. The costume jewelry. This is all kind of ridiculous. This clothing in this trunk. Especially given where we are now in the city in New Orleans. We are not in the country. We're not in Laurel. We are not on the plantation. We're not in that world. And what Stanley thinks is like really valuable and amazing, Stella's pointing out is just actually not. And he can't read it properly. So what he thinks he's looking at is where all the money's gone to. But what he's actually looking at is something much shabbier and worthless. And I think that tension is really interesting in this part of the scene. He starts pulling stuff out. A solid gold dress. I mean, that's just ridiculous, of course. But it reveals his mindset. Furs, fox pieces. Where are your white fox pieces? He seems to be feeling bad for Stella, on behalf of Stella, but I think it's clear that he's feeling bad for himself. And here he's got this idea, she's saying, look, you don't understand what you're looking at. This is just inexpensive, cheap furs. She got a long time ago. She's had it for... And here we get the first mention of this acquaintance, friends. Stanley has a lot of friends in many businesses. And it seems almost like he's collecting those people in order that he can use them, deploy them at different times. And, she's not shy now. Don't be such an idiot. And now we move to the jewelry. Oh, pearls. Ropes of pearls. He describes it as sunken treasure. Bracelets of solid gold. Where are your pearls and gold bracelets? Diamonds from an empress. And here Stella says, no, it's a rhinestone that she wore to a costume ball. And he doesn't know what rhinestone is. And she has to tell him it's next to glass. That's really important. The ability to read and understand is major issue with class. Like, can you read the value of something? This rhinestone tiara, which he thinks might be made of diamonds, comes back in scene 10, I think, where Stanley rapes Stella, and she's dressed up in a fantasy, and it looks ridiculous. I mean, when staged properly, she looks like an absolute lunatic. And a key aspect of her characterization, her costume there, is this tiara. And we really see it as a kind of crown of madness, I would say. But it isn't diamond, it's rhinestone. And that's next door to glass. Again, here we get the repetition. The repetition is what makes the comedy here. And I think reveals, again, more of who Stanley is. This is a great line. The Kowalskis and Dubois have very different notions, Stanley says. And she says, indeed they have, thank heavens. You are an idiot. We are just different people. Now here we see a real moment of tension in the relationship. And we see that Blanche coming home, or rather not coming home, but coming into Stella's world has caused more disruption than we may realize. It's put a wedge, it's put something in between her and Stanley. Clearly it has. And it could be, Stella's taking the side of her sister. It could be a memory of what Stella used to be and what she is now. But nonetheless, there is this tension. And he gets mad. She says, look, just leave it, just wait. We can do this another time, okay? And since when do you give me orders? Again, this tension is greater. He's the boss. He's the one. He's not used to this Stella. And this is going to cause more and more issues in the relationship. So I'm just going to stop here because I think the scene shifts as Blanche comes in. Actually, you know what? I'll just go to the end of I'll go to Stella leaving. So Blanche comes in. Oh no. Let's stop here and then we'll do the whole interrogation in 2 bits. With the first part, Stanley and Blanche starting this while Stella's outside, and then Blanche's strategy of getting rid of Stella, sending her down to the drugstore to get a Coke for her, and how differently the conversation goes from there.